There's a million issues where you can go like, well, this is not working correctly. And I don't know why. So it's gnawing at you and you can't ignore it. Some people try to ignore it or they try to talk themselves into, oh, it's okay. By the way, that happens a lot in companies where they sort of develop narratives that help them live with unsatisfactory situations. It's very common in business. You see that in big companies. They live with mediocrity all day long and they don't do a damn thing about it. I don't. I have a burning need to go and deal with it.
Hi, I'm Joubin, operating partner at Kleiner Perkins, and I'm excited that you're tuning into Grit. The goal of this is not for it to be a highlight reel of how successful my guests are, rather a candid exploration of how hard it is, both personally and professionally, to create, build, and scale world-class organizations. If you're a fan of the show, please subscribe, leave a review, and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thanks. When you were a kid, do you think you were really tough on yourself then?
No, I never felt like I was being hard on myself.
Do you consider yourself hard on yourself in general?
No, I don't. People sometimes infer that from, the way I generally am, but it's not from being hard on myself. It's more, we kind of live with fear of failure is probably the much more dominant sensation or dynamic that we live with, right? We fear failure, and the people that want to be high performers, they fear failure big time. They just can't deal with the prospect of, this is not going to end well. So that may come across as you being hard on yourself, but it really comes from a different place.
When would you be tough on yourself? When is it that you feel like it's unacceptable to have some version of Frank that you're not living up to?
Anytime I'm not confronting a situation that I know to be not good. I mean, the hardest part about being a CEO, at least for me is, and I think it is for most people, is that you have to confront all day, every day. The moment you know something, you're aware, it's not okay anymore to pretend like it's not happening. Now there's urgency to go and deal with it. I will not allow myself to sort of compartmentalize it and no, I'll deal with this some other time. I'm going to deal with it right now.
Do you have this urgency like everywhere? Meaning when you walk out of these offices and you go home, do you feel the same ants in your pants to move?
No. Well, look, if I have contractors around the house who are kind of screwing up a project, it's kind of the same thing, but I don't bring that attitude to my family. There's no room for that whatsoever. So I'm far more laid back and relaxed and tolerant. Imperfection is part of life, but when you're a CEO, that's just the stuff that you're there for, right? Because if you're a person that is comfortable with mediocrity, you're not in the right place.
Yeah. I heard you say after ServiceNow, when you took the time off to go sailing, right? You were just sailing. It was a couple of years, wasn't it?
2 years, exactly.
I would have thought that you would have been losing your mind. But the way that you described it is that you found it a quite satisfying experience being away from the game.
Look, I was an ocean regatta sailor, which is like running a Formula One team. So it was uber competitive, uber intense. I mean, really, okay. This is the same kind of things. It's technology, it's talent on the boat, organization, all these things that go into a business you have there as well. If I had to scratch an itch, that definitely would have been the place for it. And in many ways, it was. We were trying to win races, big races,
A lot of the times, guests that I've had in the past describe their career as the avenue with which they expense all of this pent-up energy. That's definitely how I feel. Like when I was a kid, my soccer coach used to call me Spunky because I literally had it coming out of me.
Yeah.
And I have found that a profession and a job is one of the only ways that I've figured out how to let it all out. Doing things around the margins like working out or whatever, it does something for me, but there's no way that I could give this up to release this energy. It sounds like for you, there would be other ways. Is that fair? Like you think you could do sailing full time?
No. I mean, I sailed those 2 years, I sailed like 70, 80 days a year. And that was a lot of sailing. That was a ton of sailing, especially at that level and that level of intensity. But what you're describing is some of us have a lot of unresolved issues, if you will. In other words, manifestation, and we just can't leave it alone. We really manifest ourselves through work and effort and projects like that. We do it because we have sort of unresolved situations. If you were a perfectly balanced individual, you wouldn't care. You wouldn't even have a reason to get up in the morning. But we do. Here's the thing. You have to learn to get over that, right? At some point, and when is enough. You can't, till your dying day, have that mental posture. It's pretty damned annoying. You have to learn to sort of have peace at some point in time. Maybe not when you're 20 or 30 or 40, but there comes a time you're like, okay, how many more companies do I have to run here?
Yeah.
When I finished Data Domain, which was my first company, it was a very successful company, right?
Yeah.
We took in $28 million of capital. And 6 years later, it turned into $2.4 billion. So not a bad deal, especially in those days. That was really good. But then people said, "Oh, you got lucky," and I took that the wrong way, man. So
That pissed you off.
Pissed me off, yeah. And that, by the way, that happens a lot because people can't handle other people being successful that well. It's like, oh, you're just lucky. I still hear that, by the way. You just keep getting lucky, all the time. That then triggers that chip on your shoulder, right?
Yeah.
That's what it does. There comes a time when you say, look, I'm over it.
Yeah. Do you feel like being at peace is in conflict with operating at a very high level?
A little bit. Yeah, because that conflict is really where drive comes from. Unresolved issues with siblings and parents and who knows what, high school math teacher,
Something you're trying to prove to someone somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
And you think those feelings don't really dissipate?
They do, but not entirely. It gets better and better with time, but it's very hard to be so perfectly happy and balanced with life that sort of that manifestation no longer an issue. I mean, why does Tom Brady cannot get off the damn football field after everything he's done? And by the way, all these guys have trouble getting off the field. Why? They've done everything that you could possibly imagine. It's not a unique thing. It's very common with people that are of that sort.
Do you feel this pressure like you're supposed to be at peace one day or like there is a retirement looming? Let me give you an example. Shlomo.
I do.
You're on his board at Imperva?
Yes.
So I had Shlomo on a few weeks ago. You, Shlomo, Dave from Mongo, it's a rare air of folks that have done 3. And he started 3, which is incredible. He's going to take this company public too. And he talked about this idea where he thought he was supposed to retire after this. He looked at me and he's like, Joubin, I'm not young anymore. Like, this is a young man's sport.
I agree with that.
Do you though?
Yeah, I think it is a young man's sport.
But like using your Brady analogy, is it?
Well, I think sort of Brady was obviously fantastic. I worship the ground he walks on. But there comes a time where enough is enough. You can apply yourself in other areas. It's like you can't keep throwing the ball. When you've done it so many times, you have so much to show for it. It's enough. I think learning to be satisfied with that is actually an important thing. It's a maturation thing. You can't always have that youthful spit and vinegar and that attitude and that chip on your shoulder. It's exhausting.
It must be exhausting for you.
It is.
And isn't this kind of the macro point that you make? If you want to operate at a high level, it's fucking exhausting. It's not actually as fun as people make it out to be.
No, at many levels, it's not fun at all because if you're in this confrontational mode that we just talked about, who the hell wants to be confronting situations and people all day long? And how do you do that in a way that doesn't piss everybody else off? And yet you bring everybody along in that quest to be great. So yeah, it's hard. And a lot of people like being a CEO. Well, they like the title. But being it day to day is not for many people. I think people have the intelligence for it, but they often do not have the personality of a CEO. They don't have the psychology of a CEO. And by the way, I've been part of many CEO searches, and there's a dearth of CEOs out there. It's very, very hard to find good CEOs for companies. You can just ask anybody that's involved with that part. But the reason is not that people aren't smart enough or experienced enough. It's the psychology of the job. It's bloody hard to come by.
Don't you feel misunderstood in this way? Don't you feel like the public persona or perception of you is that you somehow enjoy confrontation? Having listened to and read everything, the conclusion that I've come to is that this is a necessary evil for you.
It is a necessary evil. I don't enjoy it at all. It's something that I make myself do. I have high empathy, so how could I possibly enjoy this? So no, it's not. It's something that you have to make yourself do. It's the discipline and the fact that you can't hide from your responsibilities, that you have to confront your demons. Because you see things, you hear things. You can't pretend you didn't. You can't unhear something. So you have to act on it. You have to. That's your job. So we do it.
How often are you confronting your demons? How often do you feel like you actually have to do that?
All the time. I almost don't miss an opportunity to do it.
Can you give me an example?
Well, it's just in conversations. I mean, if something is just not right in one particular area, whoever is in charge of that area, I mean, you will have that conversation with me whether you like it or not, because I'm not going to wait for it. I'm going to give expression to that, where we will have that conversation. Not in an adversarial, ugly way. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, one of the things I've learned over the years is how to do this in such a way that people don't feel unduly, called out or just like, oh, geez, you're very unhappy with me. No, it's more like, hey, we have this set of issues. Here's what I'm hearing. This is what I'm seeing. How do you feel about this? How would you approach this? So in other words, it becomes a constructive conversation. It's a very short walk to, oh shit, he's really expressing some serious concern about what's going on in my area. Yeah, I am. But I do it in a way to make sure that it is constructed and that people are open to the conversation. That's a technique. You got to learn that, because if you're being an asshole, that's not going to end well. Everybody's going to be unhappy, and then politics set in, right? People need to think you're fair. In other words, you're not acting on an impulse, and you're fair. They believe that you're right. That is something we should, A, talk about, B, deal with.
Another misconception that at least I think I came across as I was studying you, and maybe this was just me because I'm an idiot, but Data Domain, when you joined, which was your first CEO role, first of all, you were not a spring chicken at that point. Everyone thinks that you've been born a CEO and predestined for this your entire life.
No.
How old were you at Data Domain?
I was 43 when I started there.
That's number one. Number two, again, in my mind, I feel like everyone thinks that you're this scale CEO. Data Domain had no revenue, no customers,
right.
15 employees?
Yep.
No product market fit, really.
Poor product market fits, to the point that we couldn't sell. We figured out how to sell enough for a year to stay alive, because we couldn't go and raise money and basically pay the bills. And then during that year, we made enough progress to get ourselves another year of runway, and then from there on, we opened the aperture more and more and more, and we took off like a damn rocket. The first year was like, what are we going to do? This product is too small and too slow for most mainstream use cases. And we were told very clearly, like, guys, come back when you have something that's bigger and faster, because this is not going to work. I mean, it was a terabyte of usable space on a 3U rack-mounted unit. Okay, you can't even imagine. This is 20 years ago. And this is after RAID, which is all the disk protections and all of that. But we couldn't go back and say, oh, we'll just raise some money and we'll spend a year getting the product to be bigger and faster. No, we had to survive it with the money we had and basically manage ourselves to a fundraising milestone where we could raise more money and keep ourselves in the game.
Why'd you take that job?
Well, I had interviewed with tons of startups over a period of years. And everybody always said to me, you need to hold out, don't jump. By the way, I give that advice still to a lot of people. Do not jump. Don't get so antsy that you're going to go take a second, third string type of deal. And the other thing is, look, you don't know. Data Domain, we didn't know how good an opportunity that was. It was unknowable. There was just no data to suggest anything. We were one of hundreds of companies back in those days. One of our large investors back then, I would visit their office and people would look at me like, who is that guy? And, never mind that, a few years later, we end up bailing out their entire fund. And then they knew who we were, So yeah, things changed a lot. It was an absolute juggernaut of a story, Data Domain, in those days.
But couldn't you have done something else as not the CEO at that point? Couldn't you have picked a Snowflake of that time where you were a second or third?
No, I probably wouldn't have qualified it. But look, at that point, my career didn't take off until I got my first CEO job. Yeah, I had other jobs before that, and they were okay. But being a CEO, I ended up having my hands free. And this is really what a person like me needs. I need to have full scope of responsibilities. Before that, I spent my whole life just fighting the boundaries and the swim lanes that were established in an organization. It was immensely frustrating. I didn't like a lot of the CEOs that I worked for. I learned a lot from them, but not in the way you think. I had role models that weren't positive, but you learn more from negative role models than you do from positive ones, I really needed to have my hands free, and this was my first opportunity. As I said, we were part of hundreds of companies, and we were all kind of looked at the same way, and we got lectured by the VCs about other companies. You should be more like them, and all this kind of stuff. In the end, that was one of the most successful companies of its generation, and there were a few others. Of all the companies that I've run, I still have an extremely warm feeling about that entire experience because of everything that we had to go through to achieve that outcome. Now, I didn't like the outcome because nobody ever wants to sell a company. That's the only company I've ever sold. Like ServiceNow, I mean, they're still around. It's a $140 billion market cap company. I sold. There were a bunch of reasons, for that. I learned very, very hard lessons that I have applied at later companies. So good outcome, but I also learned valuable lessons there.
The VC that doubted you, like you still wear that fucking all over you right now. That was, looking at my notes, 20 years ago.
It was funny, one of the VCs who shall remain nameless, he said, what's wrong with you? You've never run sales. And I went on to run the next 3 fastest growing companies in the history of Silicon Valley. And they were like, you've never run sales. So basically, what the problem is with VCs, they just want to check boxes. They cannot judge talent at all, which is a severe weakness. I see it in the NFL as well, right? I mean, look at the quarterback of the 49ers, right? Mr. Irrelevant, he was last picked in the draft. Now he's in the running for MVP. People can't judge talent at all. They just check boxes. 5-year-old can check a box.
Do you feel like you're pretty good at judging talent?
Yes.
You feel like that's your thing?
It is my thing. What do you think? I do all this by myself?
I don't. How much time do you spend judging talent? How much time do you spend recruiting? If you were to audit your calendar,
I don't know.
50%?
No, certainly when you say about judging talent, that's every single meeting that I am. I'm always judging. And I'm judging them not just like, do I like you or don't I like you? I judge people on many different vectors, if you will.
Yeah.
But what I'm very sensitive to is, people that lack task ownership, people that try to delegate upward. I have many, many vectors that I judge people on. They don't even realize it, but I listen and, I interpret behaviors and they stick with me. I see huge differences between people. I can tell when people are going to go places and when they're not. It just exhibits itself in their general posture towards many things. That's what you learn over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And having been with tons of people and you've seen them, you've seen the ones that succeed and the ones that struggle.
And your idea is that there is a extremely high, hard to ignore correlation between those that are going places and some maladjustment, something that's bothering them that probably came from a young age.
I think so. I mean, you can ask Elon Musk, do you think that guy has someone to prove? Of course he does. There's nothing wrong with that. It's very human. It's how most people are. They have unresolved, unfinished business. Absolutely. If they were in perfect balance, why get out of bed? Elon Musk has meetings at 1 a.m., I hear from people, closer to him. How many people want to do that? Not many.
Yeah.
So there's something that propels them that's pretty damn powerful.
The interview that he did, which was quite a hilarious interview, one of the things that he was talking about is the storm in his mind. Did you see that?
Yes.
Where he talks about this storm in his mind. Does that resonate with you?
No, but he is a true entrepreneur in the sense that he has a million ideas, a minute. But as he said, I can't execute on them. So I don't lack ideas. I have plenty of ideas, but I lack execution is really what he said. I'm more on the other hand. I don't have the ideas, but I have the execution. So I sort of have the other end of the equation.
This idea of the voices in his head, I feel that all the time. When I was a kid, I used to hear screaming in my head. And then as I've grown older, it's just annoying, kind of the noisy neighbor in your head that just keeps banging away at it. And I feel it mostly in times of transition, meaning when I'm going from Friday afternoon, simple example, stopping work to going into what should be family or friends or whatever, that's when the voices in my head become very, very loud. I don't know why, but it's almost like I lose something in the transition. Do you feel that ever?
I'm different. I'm not somebody that has tons of voices in his head. It's more that I have gnawing. I'm becoming aware of things that sort of gnaw at me.
Like what?
When I just think that this is not going to work.
Like if there's a problem, someone that you know is not the right fit, that type of thing.
Oh yeah, or products that are not tracking and all of that, acceptance issues, product market fit issues. There's a million issues where you can go well, this is not working correctly, and I don't know why. So it's gnawing at you, and you can't ignore it. Some people try to ignore it, or they try to talk themselves into, oh, it's okay. By the way, that happens a lot in companies where they sort of develop narratives that help them live with unsatisfactory situations. It's very common in business. You see that in big companies. They live with mediocrity all day long and they don't do a damn thing about it. I don't. I have a burning need to go and deal with it.
That's kind of the point of your book. If I could summarize it, that is the book. But then doesn't it kind of beg the question, if you're not predisposed that way, if you don't have that gnawing feeling where you're dissatisfied, where you see something and you're okay with it, don't you think that's either in you or not? Meaning this idea of amping it up, can't you only use that if you have this feeling, the gnawing that you describe?
I also refer to it as malcontent. I like to attract people that have a general sense of being malcontented. I like people like that. We always talk about things that are wrong, that are not well, because we like talking about things that are wrong, because that gives us a sense that, okay, at least we're talking about it now. I had a founder in one of the previous companies, that said, he says, I feel like you're indicting everything I've done, and that's because we're talking about problems. And it wasn't meant to be an indictment. I was not trying to indict anybody, but it was just like that's our natural tendency to want to talk about things that are not going well.
Yeah. Why'd you start the book with a daring greatly quote?
That's because the book is literally meant for the man in the arena. This came out of a speech by Theodore Roosevelt, 1910, Sorbonne in Paris, part of a much bigger speech that was called Citizenship in a Republic. This is only one little paragraph, of that, but he talks about the man in the arena. And by the way, it's now known as the man in the arena speech. But it is exactly for those people. And I know a lot of people that clutch my book like a combat manual. I don't even know what the real reason is. How can you be sure? But it's because they feel that I know what they're going through. And because they read it and they're like, this guy knows exactly what I'm going through, which is why they clutch it. This is about as real as it gets to them.
Yeah.
Whereas there's lots of people who are not the man in the arena. They don't get the book at all. It just goes over their head or it doesn't register. And then because they are not the man in the arena, they are just observers, people with an opinion. But if you've been in the combat seat, you react very differently to the things that I'm talking about. And I'm not trying to convince anybody. I mean, I wrote it more like, hey, you want to know? This is our best answer at your questions. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that you need to agree with it. We don't really care whether you agree with it or not. Do you ask the question? Here's the answer.
This is random. Like, do you feel proud? Do you experience the emotion of pride?
I very actively suppress the emotion of pride. And the reason, not because it's one of the mortal sins. I do it because the moment I'm proud, I'm done for, because now I'm satisfied with the status quo. That doesn't go with the malcontented nature, obviously. In the moment you're feeling pride, you're checking the box, you're in the end zone, you would do a victory lap, high five. I don't want to be in that place because that makes me weak. When I get satisfied with a situation, that makes me weak.
Do you feel like the team, the organization inherits that feeling?
I try to hire to that attitude and that posture so people with me are very comfortable with that sort of state of mind, because it's just how we are. We don't think anything of it. We think it's normal, actually.
Yeah.
But not everybody. I just gave you an example. People took, a real exception to it because they feel like, well, you're just indicting what's going on here or what's been done. I'm like, it's not meant to be a personal attack. We're talking about the issues. We're not talking about people who did what to whom. It's just about something is not working well, and we're just talking about what we can do and all of that. We think that's a pretty normal thing. I think it's good for organizations to always be examining and talking about what can we do different and what can we do better. How do we become better? In the book, I talk a lot about the different things that we do. The whole don't be incremental. In your approach, don't start with the status quo. Try to develop future version of what you're aiming for. If you didn't have any legacy, and then work your way back. Those are all things about, okay, how do I approach something in a way that really yields energy and excitement, and we're now really like what we're doing. You have to like what you're doing, otherwise why get up in the morning, right? Mm-hmm. This is not about getting through the day and, geez, it's 4 o'clock, I'm ready for a cocktail kind of thing. It should be fun and exciting and energizing and pace and all the stuff that makes the day fly by, as opposed to all the stuff that makes the day a drag.
And when you were a kid, where did this come from? Your dad, your mom, at the dinner table, was it achievement oriented?
I wouldn't say it was achievement oriented, but to some degree it was more like you better work up to your potential, whatever that is. In other words, you needed to be seen as working pretty hard, but it was not an absolute, achievement standard, if that makes any sense. My dad always said, I go to work, you go to school. Okay, that's your job. You're going to leave it all in the field. You're going to do the best you can. Whatever that is, he said, I'll accept. If you're not putting everything into it, that will not be accepted.
And the putting everything into it, there's no end state there.
Exactly. And that is the problem with it. I mean, it looks like a reasonable, enlightened way of thinking about it. In reality, it becomes a never enough dynamic, because when is it enough?
Yeah. Do you feel like you do enough today? When you put your head on the pillow at night, did you tell yourself, like, I did enough?
I actually have that test for myself and for others as well, because I talk about drivers versus passengers. And somebody asked me once, how do I know I'm a driver? And I said, you better find out before I do, right? It was sort of a joke. But it's not entirely a joke, because if you have to ask, you probably aren't. You should know that when you were on the ship and you come home on a Friday night, did it matter that I was there? Did I change? Was it really essential that I was there? Are we much better off because I was there, yes or no? And you need to answer that in the honesty of your own mind. Don't bullshit yourself. You know? Can you answer that with conviction? Every Friday night, like, I really did stuff that changed the course of history. That's a high bar.
Is that your bar?
That is my bar.
Do you ask yourself that every fucking Friday?
Yes.
And how often are you like, yeah, this week?
Well, most of the time, there's certainly enough there where I go like, yeah, it mattered that I was there.
You really ask yourself that every week?
Yeah, because if I'm just a passenger on the ship, might
as
well
your
not
nightmare.
Yeah, that's my nightmare, yeah. And by the way, there's lots of passengers on the shipping companies, right? They just kind of, nobody would miss them if they weren't there. Well, I don't want to be that person.
Yeah. And feel free to not answer, but with your kids, how do you explain the feeling of pride?
It's a very different dynamic that way, right? Because you have more of a nurturing thing.
It's different.
It's just different.
Yeah.
And you're much more forgiving. You're much more patient, and also understanding that not everybody is the same. Not everybody has the same psychological makeup. They definitely don't.
Yeah.
Some people are naturally a certain way and others not at all. So you have to account for that, right? You cannot have sort of one giant performance bar for everybody.
Totally.
You'll destroy the relationships because they can't handle that.
Is it annoying for you? Like, I don't know, we're going into Christmas. Christmas is next week, okay? It's like going to be a very nice time with your family. It's going to be a very nice time with my family. And I look at the calendar and I don't see any meetings on there. And I immediately feel anxious. Like, I immediately feel like I'm not doing enough. And that feeling then manifests itself when I'm doing these things, when I'm supposed to be not doing those things. And I actually hate it. Like, I hate living in the delta between those two realities.
Give it a few more years, you might start to ease up on yourself,
So you can totally...
No, look, I'm always plugged in. I'm never off.
Yeah.
We communicate also. People don't realize, but our day goes on and on and on. We're always talking. Not everything is, an intense confrontational situation. Sometimes it's just, hey, I heard this, what do you know, kind of a thing. So there's lots of threats that are happening even when we're supposedly off, So.
Do you have, idols? Do you even believe in this idea of idols? People that you, really look up to?
I've read an awful lot of biographies over the years, obviously of people that are historical figures for the most part, but also people that are a little bit more contemporary as well. I don't know about idols, but I'm certainly, I can be very inspired by certain historical figures, people who their personal character was so impressive. Is that an idol? I think that might be too strong, but it's just a sense of great respect and regard, yes, definitely.
As you were rising through the ranks of your career and your stature kind of continued to build, I'm sure you had people that you would look up to, maybe CEOs and stuff. And eventually you probably got to meet all of them. Did they ever exceed the expectation that you had of them in their mind?
I never really thought about that, so I don't even know how to answer that. Some questions just don't occur to me.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
There's been a lot of great people. What's important to me is the content of their character as well. It's not just what you achieved. It's just, how did you do it? Did you become a total asshole in the process? That's not okay. It's how you play the game matters a whole lot. Now, to some people, that doesn't matter. Only the outcome matters. I don't see it that way.
You said something at some point where you said you sold all your boats during Snowflake or going into Snowflake.
Well, I only have one.
You sold it?
Yes, because I just didn't think I was going to have time to sail, or I didn't want to have to take time to sail because I wanted to be fully plugged in and I didn't want any distractions. I'm big at nuking distractions. I do that all day.
You literally burn the boats.
No, I didn't burn them, I donated them,
Yeah.
So, but yes, because, I'm undivided focus and attention. Look, I take my own medicine, okay? So fully, 100%. I'm not a very balanced person that way at all.
What's your favorite interview question? Do you have one or two that you just like, that you drill people with?
Yes, I'm big on understanding what people's aptitudes are. And there's a number of ways to assess that. You can look at people's experiences and what they've achieved and so on. You can infer from that what their aptitudes are. But I ask the question, what do they think their aptitude is? What is your center of gravity? What is the stuff that you think you're really, really good at? It's my first question, because that's the most interesting thing about you as a person in an interview is not what you did, is about what you're naturally great at. Because I can give you experience, but I can't give you aptitude. So that's why I'm really hiring aptitude, because I'm going to give you the experience. Now, experience can reveal aptitude, but not necessarily. So I ask that question, and I also ask the inverse of that question, which is, what do you suck at? People think that's a trick question. It's not a trick question. We are good at some things. We're not that good at others. So that's the conversation.
Yeah, and when you talk about aptitude, specifically you mean like, what's your power zone? Where do you really spike?
Exactly. Where do you naturally become sort of the best version, of yourself? And everybody has things that might be very slim and narrow, but they have something, and I want to know what that is and what they think it is.
Isn't it interesting that it's almost always the place that they're most excited about?
Exactly.
And where their energy is where they spike?
People never ask me that question. They go through your resume and they look at all the jobs you've had and they have questions about that, but they don't ask you the question that is the most important one, which is, what are you good at? What do you think you're good at? What is the real you here? What makes you you? It's the most interesting question and the most important question you can ask in an interview, and they rarely get asked.
Yeah. How do you answer that? Talent? Hiring?
No, I'm a very abstract, lateral thinker and operator. I'm not a functional exec. I'd be a lousy engineer. I'd be a lousy finance person, because those are functional. They're narrow and they have functional depth. They're experts. Whereas, I have ability to abstract and to think laterally across domains, and that's how I'm naturally wired. That's really good for a CEO, by the way, because that's almost the definition of the job. Obviously, that makes me suitable for certain kinds of things and not so much for other kinds of things.
Isn't that also probably why you were discounted and underrated for so long? Because how do you test for that?
I was a product manager, and I also was a GM for a product, meaning that I built a lot of products and I took them to market.
Yeah.
By the way, I was almost subversive in doing it, because I was basically an enterprise, a tiny enterprise inside a much bigger enterprise. And I basically overcame the natural boundaries that existed in enterprises in doing it. And people, almost resented me for it, because nothing was going to stop me. Any barrier, any boundary, wasn't going to stop me, right? Because I had a goal. I was going to push that product into the end zone. That takes incredible, resourcefulness and determination, but working, basically the organization you were in became really the challenge. I mean, selling on the outside was easy compared to selling on the inside, And that's the reason why once I got my hands free as a CEO, I was fully empowered. Now, when you're not a CEO, you're not empowered. I mean, by the way, I'm big on empowerment for that reason. I'm giving you all the rope and all the rein you could ever want. Most people don't even know how to take the rope and the rein that I give them, because they're not used to it. Most CEOs I know don't understand how much rope and rein they were really given. They always think they have to please the board, as if that matters.
When you first got your hands free as the CEO, did you f anything up? Anything that you wish you could do over, that you see a bunch of other CEOs that just now get their hands free do?
Yeah, of course, because, you make a lot of the decisions that don't pan out. That's just the nature of making decisions. Some of them are going to be boneheaded.
So you mean just wrong decisions?
Yeah, especially around hiring. I've made tons of mistakes over the years, but I correct them. That's sort of the difference, right? I'm not going to go tolerate a bad hire or mediocrity. I'll keep going until I get it right.
And then revisiting the what do you spike at and what do you suck at? How would you answer the second half of the question on the suck at?
Well, like I said, I'm not a functional, in-depth expert on any one topic. I can roll with engineering, I can roll with finance, I can roll with legal, because I'm dangerous enough in all those areas, but not to the level of expertise that, the people that's all they do would have. But I'm dangerous enough to know the area. That also makes you a good lateral operator, because I know quite a bit about a lot of things. But I'm not the expert, but I'm dangerous enough to be very effective with the experts. I'm good at learning, new things very quickly. In all my hobbies, my favorite thing is I'm going to get my own private coach or instructor. I can learn very, very fast.
You do that?
Yeah, I do it all the time. Whatever it is, golf, cooking. I mean, it's like, when I have a one-on-one expert, I can learn very, very fast.
So when you want to learn something, you'll just call the expert of that thing and they'll just coach you.
Yeah.
Cooking? Come on. You got a cooking coach?
Yes, all the time. It's called YouTube, So, Tony Robbins, wrote a book many years ago. It's still super popular, but he said, look, if you want to learn how to do something, what are you going to do? You're going to find the world's foremost expert, and you're going to go bloody well ask him.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's common sense, isn't it? Isn't that the fastest way to learn the best from really, really good people?
It's definitely my instinct on how to learn too. A lot of people would pick up a book or something. It's like a lot of people would probably find other ways of doing it. If someone wants to learn from you, they can reach out to you, but that's why you wrote the book in some respect.
It is. I mean, I've had people that said to me, can I just shadow you for a week or something? And I'm like, no. First of all, I don't want to be shadowed by anybody. And secondly, don't try to be me. You need to become you. You need to find your path. You can't be me. There's only one of me, and my mother would be happy to know there's only one of me. One is enough. We broke the mold afterwards. Just, you can never be me. You need to figure out how you become you. It's just a very different path. So don't try to look at me like, oh, I'm just going to copy the recipe, and then I can go spike the ball in the end zone. It doesn't work that way.
Do you feel like you came into your own, meaning you are who you are, intense, hardcore operator, etc., but that's not status quo. You are different than most. Was there a point where you stopped feeling pressure to assimilate to the style of all these other CEOs and operators and really lean into Frank?
Yeah, I definitely don't try to emulate some other.
Did it take you doing data domain and putting that on the fucking table to be like, you know what?
Honestly, it didn't. It's just how I'm wired. When I was a data domain, I was over the top intense because...
More than now.
Yeah, way more, because I'd burned the ships behind me. It was an absolute no way to fail. There's just no room to fail here. I mean, the level of intensity that brings on is just unbelievable. But it also is what opens the window to successes, right? Because, like I said earlier, we were not considered a special company for a long time, right? And we had such overwhelming success, but a lot of that came from a group of people who really had this ability to not just understand their challenges really, really well, intellectually honest, but then also figure out what the hell to do about it, not just on engineering, but also on go-to-market. We did a lot of things differently. When we were a neurotic, paranoid bunch, never satisfied with anything, that is fertile ground for breakout scenarios,
Actually, a lot of people ask me my definition of sales, and my favorite one is the transfer of enthusiasm from one person to another. What do you make of that?
When I talk to salespeople, they sometimes ask me a question, maybe phrased a little bit differently, but I always talk about inspiring. In other words, you can't make somebody buy something, but you can inspire them to buy something. In other words, you give them the motivation to buy something. I often tell people, like if I'm working with an architect to build something, right? I always say, inspire me. Don't just draw something. Inspire me to want to build this, because I'm not going to build it if I'm not inspired. I won't. Inspiration is a whole different level of, oh man, this is so great. I want to go and do this, or I want to go and build this. When I'm selling, I'm trying to give people a vision of what they can accomplish, that where they go, holy shit, I want to do this, for them. Not for us. So you can't really sell, right? I mean, selling is a very indirect thing, because you would be one of those guys on TV who's hawking a piece of soap or whatever it is. I mean, like, really? I'm going to go buy that? No, that's not inspiring. Inspiration is a very powerful word because it causes somebody else to want to do something.
Do you look forward to the day on the rocking chair on the porch?
I don't even think about that, quite honestly.
Never?
No. It doesn't occur to me.
You don't talk to your wife about like what happens one day when we get, the kids leave?
We're more like you're sort of evolving, but it's not like do nothing all day or just taking it easy. I mean, you become bitter from the sweet. How much bad golf can you play? So no, you need to stay. I know people of my vintage, they often talk about their third act. The first act being growing up, education, act one, and act two is the entire career, and then act three is what comes after that. It can be all kinds of things. For some people it's charitable things and all of that, trying to make a difference. Look at people like Bill Gates. They obviously have a huge third act in what they want to accomplish. But that's sort of, not a bad way to think about it. You still want to be impactful at some level in some way. Make a difference.
Going back to your Tom Brady analogy, the reason Brady stayed on the field for so long, the way he described it was like, I know the answers to the test. And yeah, maybe I'm physically declining, but my mind is sharper than it ever was, and it sees the field in a way that it never did. And I have an enormous clarity of purpose in why I'm doing this. I think there's something very freeing about that when you're just doing it just for the love.
Well, you look at these quarterbacks, they live for these split-second situations that turns the game from, losing to winning, right? Do you think that's addicting? Of course it is. You're never more alive than when you're doing stuff like that, right? It is amazing. How do you give that up? And maybe it doesn't happen every game, but it happens enough. How many times did you see Brady do that? How many times did you see Montana do that? Well, you may not because you're not old enough, but, he did that too. He could bring, and by the way, there's other quarterbacks, that can bring a team in two plays into the red zone, Do you think they're addicted to that? Big time they are. There's nothing that gives them a greater sense of fulfillment than that stuff. They can't give it up.
I only have a few minutes left. One quote that you said that I loved is that early stage enterprises often feel like they're shrouded in a fog of war. Can you describe that feeling?
Well, it's just mass confusion. You don't know which way is up or down and sideways. You don't know whether you're completely screwed and, you're just going to get your ass kicked or no, there is a way out. And the fog of war is just, you just don't know where it's coming from and you don't know what the right way forward is. And this is where you learn leadership skills, right? Because in spite of the confusion and the uncertainty, you're going to lay out a path. Here's what we're doing. Everybody come along. And it's very, very important, to develop high clarity, high conviction, high courage. I talk about these things, a lot as a leader. That's how you become a leader. If you start reflecting back, the uncertainty and chaos and mayhem, you're not going to be any good as a leader. You're going to have to take your team forward. It happened to me at ServiceNow, which has just become such an incredibly successful company. There was a time where several of the people of my management team, people that had been with me for a long time, said, you need to sell the company. We can't do this.
Why?
Oh, because nothing was working.
Really?
We couldn't keep the systems up. CIOs calling us like, what the hell is going on over there? There was so much chaos and mayhem going on.
They're caving from the pressure.
Yeah, they were. At that moment of time, I just smiled and like, no, we are going to execute our way out of this. And we did painstakingly over a considerable amount of time. People don't know that. All they see on the outside is, this incredibly successful company. They have no idea the hardships we went through and the sheer terror. Opening up my email at 6 a.m. was like terror because I cannot imagine the amount of hell that transpired during the night. All that went on. People always think like all we do is victory laps and we're so great and everything is wonderful. It's not like that. It is sheer terror a lot of the time. Certainly data domain was like that. We didn't even know whether we could sell a product or not. But then, we had the service at ServiceNow that I remember one day some freelancing technician accidentally, inadvertently upgraded 800 customers and they all broke. You cannot imagine the sheer hell that happens. And I don't even know to this day how the hell we survived that.
How long are you willing to endure that?
It's the kind of terror that will stay with you forever because you can just taste it.
Almost like you're going to throw up inside, like you can feel the feeling of throwing up.
Oh, yeah. So that's what people don't know about how close companies come to blowing themselves up. They don't know because all they see is, big market cap, IPOs, victory laps. But what goes on the inside sometimes is just terrifying.
And do you feel like the fog of war eventually gets lifted? Meaning, do you feel like you're definitely out of the fog of war now?
Yes. My whole game is to eliminate the fog of war. I'm after clarity and conviction. We're going to see it very, very clearly, okay? And we work on developing clarity all the time. That's what we do. Like I said, clarity, conviction, and courage, they go hand in hand. And it all happens between your ears,
I hope you're not done after this. I really sincerely, I hope you find another one that gets you excited.
Hey, Snowflake has been a fantastic journey for us, especially now.
So you don't feel less terror these days?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, by the way, every CEO feels terror because you're just not in touch with reality if you don't. The one thing I'll tell you is it's Shantanu Narayan, who's the CEO of Adobe. He said to me once, he says, I can't figure you out. He says, are you such a good CEO or you just know how to pick up? And I said, you know what? There's a little bit of both. And the reason is this, right? It's like playing cards. You can be a great card player, James Bond, etc. If you got a bad hand, it won't matter, right? But if you're a good card player and you couple that with a good hand, now you can do some real damage. You need a little bit of both, or maybe a lot of both, to get really extraordinary outcomes. That's really what it is. I cannot turn a shit pile into Snowflake. I can't.
But did you think Data Domain was?
Data Domain had the right gene pool for me to work with. I knew how to navigate the immense problems we had in the beginning. I didn't know it. I just somehow found my way through. To say that I know it is incorrect. I didn't know it. I just did. Sometimes if you don't have any choices, then it's easy because you just take the path that's open to you. There's no other path. So that's what you take. And that's what I did at Data. I mean, how I survived that first year. And I'll tell you the story real quickly because it's instructive, right? I started at Data Domain. I already knew about some of the issues. On day one, the Monday, I went to see the CIO of Documentum. Documentum was acquired by EMC years later. He's like, nice to meet you, first day on the job, blah, blah, blah. So we're getting through all our niceties in the conversation. And he says, you know what? Your box was a real hero here on Friday afternoon. And I'm like, do tell. And he said, we corrupted our email database, which was a thing back then. Exchange databases got corrupted. And he says, we were going to be here all weekend long recovering that database from tape. We had cots, we were getting our cots. We were going to, because the tapes got fed, right?
Right.
And he says, then we realized we had it backed up in your little box. He kept saying my little box. He says, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He says, we went home by 7 p.m. that night. He says, we would have been here all night long. Then I understood, I can sell this. Even though it's only, exchange databases and fairly extreme scenarios, people will buy this box to protect them from that scenario. They will do it. And I was able to sell that again and again and again. I sold $3 million worth that year one. The next year, the system was twice as big, twice as fast. Now I'm starting to touch the low end of the higher end use cases. Then I sold 15 million the next year, then 45 million the next year. 125 million the next year, 250 million the year thereafter. I still know the numbers, by heart. I'll never forget it. 500 million the year after. I mean, it was, and then the EMC got a hold of it. Holy shit. I mean, they sold the living shit out of it. The EMC has a tremendous channel, but we had a tremendous product. So you put those together,
Yeah. Well, you're kind of doing that now, aren't you?
Sure, of course.
Like you're doing that at Snowflake now.
Snowflake has very different challenges. They're all different, right? So this is where, intellectual honesty and first principles are so important because they're all different, right? I mean, Snowflake went from very narrow swim lanes. We were just basically modernizing traditional data warehousing workloads, right? And we did that with all these cloud inventions that we had. And it's a long story, but it was amazing because But now the swim lanes are gone. We're in a mega market now. We're not just doing these old data warehousing workloads. And we are full spectrum now. We're doing application development, programmability frameworks. I mean, we're in a mega market now. And the opportunity is 1,000 times bigger. Unfortunately, the amount of shit we have to do is also 1,000 times bigger than what we were originally conceived to do as a company. So strategically, this is an extremely challenging company. Again, people don't see that on the outside because they're not close enough to it.
No, I mean, that's why I do the show, to be honest, is because I think there's a story to tell on the inside that is up and to the right with jagged edges that you would not believe how sharp they are.
Now you know why we're terrorized, okay?
This feeling of knowing how much luck permeates in the confluence of your skill and luck, that's got to be a scary feeling.
I'm very respectful of luck. I've been a student of luck for a lot of years, and I've seen a lot of founders that they go like, I did this, I'm brilliant, I'm amazing, I can do it at will. And none of them could. None of them could. They got lucky one time. They had this confluence of all these things, right? And it panned out and it became this thing. But then they think, I can do it at will. No, you can't, unless your name is Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. The rest of them, they cannot do it again, ever. And all of a sudden, they're all frustrated. I'm like, yeah, there's factors that go into this that you don't even understand. Because they just thought like, oh, I'm so brilliant, so whatever I touch, it's going to turn into. No, it doesn't.
I feel like that respect for luck is very important for you to drive you.
Well, I call it the life spark. There's a life spark that makes businesses viable. Understanding what that is and how that works is really hard. You can't even be sure of it. How are you sure of that? I mean, you can inspect it and look at it and have theories about it. How do you know? Is it timing? Is it situational? What is it? Why is one company viable and 500 of them just aren't,
Don't you think that when people say what they did and how they did it, it's just a rewritten narrative of a few things that you fit their story neatly?
Companies that have high velocity out of the gate are very, very rare and very, very special. The word velocity, I use it a lot. Velocity is the truth. That's the only thing. If you have it, you're real. And if you don't have it, you're dead. By the way, if you're a VC, that's the only thing you look for is velocity, because it tells you everything you need to know.
I appreciate you. I could keep going for hours with you, so thank you.
You're welcome.
I wrap all these the same. Is Snowflake hiring? If so, what are you hiring for? Is there anything you're not hiring for?
No, we hire across the board, and you need to. Obviously, we're hiring without restraint in engineering roles. We also buy a lot of companies, that's really hiring. When we buy companies, what we're really doing is hiring talent, most of the time. Again, technology comes from talent, so talent is always the foundation of everything. I refer to them as stem cells, they're power cells that we bring into the body, sometimes in areas that we don't have or where we want to fortify and reinforce. So, yeah, we hire in every category, whether it's our commercial legal team, I met with this morning. Lawyers are really important in getting deals done, You want to sell, you need lawyers. We need people in all kinds of capacity. It does take a village. It does take all these people coming together, and they do. That's one of the great satisfactions of business is you're seeing the whole team come together day in and day out. It's fantastic.
Do you think the organization works for sales?
Yeah, we have this strict question, when we walk into a room, who's in sales here, and the hands go up. And of course, the right answer is we're all in sales. And sales is the tip of the spear, and everybody else is the wood that's packed behind the arrowhead. The alignment is very, very important because they confront reality first, long before we do. They also have the hardest job, so we have to line up behind them. And they have to feel it as well, that the whole organization is there to help them succeed. I find that a healthy organizational posture. And by the way, a lot of people find it logical and also it makes them feel like I know where I fit in this picture.
It couldn't be more opposite of most Silicon Valley companies, though.
Yeah, well, they're going to be very tech-led, but somebody has to buy stuff,
Yeah. Last one. When you hear the word grit, what do you think of? What comes to mind?
It just means you're going to basically progress no matter what. You're not backing off. You're not backing away. You find a way through. That's what I think of as grit. And certainly in the face of much friction and opposition, being able to persevere and find ways through. You need a lot of that in this business.
I was looking forward to doing this for a long time, so I appreciate you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's it. Thanks for tuning in. Feel free to come back every Monday morning to listen to a new guest or go back into the archives when we've done more than 100 episodes. This podcast is a Kleiner Perkins production, and the episode was edited by Eric Johnson from Lightning Pod. Thank you all.